Thank you, Mr. C. Chatterman, for sharing the Singaporean viewpoint. Ladies and gentlemen, our next topic for discussion is media perspective. Please allow me to invite Mr. Manu Joseph, columnist for the International New York Times, to give us his thoughts on the media perspectives for the 2014 Indian election.
Good evening. We should talk about journalism and big business, though they don't mean different things anymore, and the intersection of journalism, big business, and the Indian election. About a year ago, at the India Today conclave, the key speaker was Narendra Modi, who by then had started behaving like the future Prime Minister of India. Though I have no idea how the Indian Prime Minister is supposed to behave. But he had that gravitas about him. And the audience comprised of some of the richest people in India and in Delhi. One of them was a major industrialist. And Mr. Modi gave a very, very long speech, which was chiefly about himself and Gujarat and how Gujarat has to be replicated all over India. But this industrialist was in the audience, and I was observing him, and he kept looking at Mr. Modi with very big eyes. He already had big eyes, but he made his eyes even bigger. And I think he also had a tilt of his head. This was pure admiration. And after the speech, when Mr. Modi got down to the high table, there were several chairs, and this industrialist was supposed to be a part of it, but he had got a far-flung chair. So he deftly switched two name cards so that he could move a bit closer to Mr. Modi. This industrialist, I don't want to name it, but in case you can watch the video of the India Today conclave, and if there is a feed of the audience, you know who I'm talking about. You can't miss his eyes. He is symbolic of how big and small Indian business looks at Modi. See, there are two very important components here. One, they really do admire him. But two, they also want him to know that they admire him. Now, there is a way of doing this, apart from making very big eyes and tilting your head. Own the media. Either you own it directly or indirectly, and which has happened. Now, there are some very good reasons why the Indian business community likes Mr. Modi. There is a perception of him as a person who is a great friend of business. Now, what is the truth? I wonder if the truth matters. I think truth is something you get at a 90% discount in a good independent bookstore. What matters is perception, and perception is branding, and the perception is that Mr. Modi knows business and is a great friend of business. At the India Today conclave, Mr. Modi cracked a joke. I wish I could tell you that I've never heard that before, but I think it was a good joke. And he repeats that joke very often because that is, he uses that to convey what he thinks of the Congress government. There are two friends who go hunting in a forest, and they don't find any tigers, so they leave the guns in the tent and they go for a walk, and lo, there's a tiger right in front of them. They don't know what to do because the guns are back in the tent. So one of them takes his wallet out and shows the tiger his arms license. So he says the Congress government keeps talking about legalese, it keeps talking about acts, but it never acts on any of them, which the pun belongs to Mr. Modi. So he says that I want to make everything simple, I want to make everything practical, I want to move, I want to act, I'm a man of action. And the businessmen I've spoken to, the business community I've spoken to, they have no doubts at all that he is someone who is going to be very useful to them. Also, he makes the right statement. I want to read, when I had reported his speech at the India Today conclave, and I just want to read out my report of something he had said. He says he has no mantra or tantra and pitches his talk around the idea of thinking differently. thinking, he says in English, out of the box. By way of example, he says that the government's employment guarantee scheme, which assures employment or wages to the poorest of Indians for 100 days in a year, must be positioned not as a social welfare measure, but as a conscription call to the poor to dedicate 100 days of their lives to the nation. There is applause from some of India's richest people as if to drown out the canned laughter of the poor. So, but these are statements which have gone down very well, not just with the business community, but also with the Indian middle class, which feels that the Indian government headed by the Indian National Congress is too pro-poor, they're squandering wealth in social welfare schemes, etc. Whether Mr. Modi will be able to change that, we'll come to that later. Now, after the disgrace of the 2002 communal riots, the canonization, the resurrection of Narendra Modi has been spectacular, and it has been through the transmission of this perception that he is a progressive man. The only medium which could have conveyed this message was Indian journalism, and I think it did a splendid job. Now, there is, I'll tell you as a journalist, there is a certain affection for Mr. Modi and in the very core of Indian journalism. There is a lot of contempt too, but now there is a centrality to the affection for Mr. Modi. And that is important. And in case he loses in Varanasi to Arvind Kejriwal, I know that a lot of the aura will vanish. But as of now, as we speak, there is a centrality to the affection. And some journalists say that that's because it's influenced by promoters who own Indian journalism. I think that's a very lazy analysis. We forget very often that Indian journalists are humans too. And they are part of the middle class, and they are ideologically aligned. And they do feel that Indian nationalism and Hindu nationalism go together. They have all these beliefs. And they really are not pushing the promoter's brief when they do a set of stories. Also, more importantly, they, a lot of people in the Indian middle class either lost a lot of money or their investment did not grow very fast under the Congress government. And you see, material laws can drive people to something very close to passion. And that has been one of the underrated phenomena of Indian middle class reaction to the current government and the reaction to Mr. Modi. It's a combination of dejection and hope. Actually, I don't know if you know that sometimes when India loses, actually India loses in cricket often, but sometimes when they lose, you see that some people have burned the effigies of cricketers on the streets. Actually, these effigies are made with very uncooked hands, so all Indian effigies look alike, but you can see the names. That's where they add the names of who these effigies belong to, and they often belong to Indian cricketers. And people feel that these are fans who are distraught that India has lost. They're so distraught that they're burning their effigies. Actually, if you dig a bit deep, you would realize these are gamblers who have lost, who bet on India, and they've lost a lot of money because India lost. And they are totally wild. There is a bit of effigy burning and gambling which goes around in the middle class, and I feel that a lot of Indian journalists too, just like the rest of the middle class, are dejected that their investments have not grown very fast, and they want a new government that will give them a better hope. Also, there's another interesting phenomenon which includes Indian journalism. I'll read from a small portion from a piece I've written for the International New York Times. This is when Mr. Modi and Rahul Gandhi were reaching out to the Indian middle class through English media, chiefly television media, and it was unprecedented. In the analysis of the revolutionary springs that have come and gone in Asia, one factor is often overlooked: how much the elite of the developing world loves the idea of home, where the good life comes at a discount, status is simply granted, there can be feudal lords, and the chances of their daughters going astray are low. And when this love for home has been deepened by the decline of the West, the rise of Asia, the diminishing charms of escaping to affluent countries, and the enchanting idea which has consumed both resident and expatriate elite, that they can make home a better place and thus have it all. The Indian middle class awakening has quickly evolved in the summer of 2011 from a collegiate self-righteous rage against politics to an unprecedented interest in politics. It has ceased to be an imitation of the photogenic Arab Spring and turned into a substantial and influential current that Indian politicians are no longer able to dismiss. Now, I think Rahul Gandhi was the victim of this middle class awakening. He was dismissed as a fool, and Mr. Modi was the beneficiary of this middle class awakening. Though there were times when he would say things like internet is a game changer, but they were willing to forgive everything about him because they believed that he could do something significant, and Indian journalists were part of this. Now, the promoters. Now, the promoters obviously were very pro-Modi, apart from the reasons I mentioned. There was also a perception that he could harm them in incremental ways if he wished to. As one industrialist who owns a publication told me that this is a person you don't mess with. So the combination of respect, admiration and fear ensured that the promoters wanted their publications or channels that they owned to a particular line. And I'm also told by someone who's aware of these things that Rahul Gandhi is a man who wished he was Arvind Kejriwal, but he was born a prince. So when he tried to do a set of things within the Congress party, that ended up alienating big business. And what that did, and I could feel the effects of it, is that big business was willing to overtly support Mr. Modi and BJP, even at the risk of antagonizing the International Congress Party, which I thought was one of the most interesting things which have happened now. One last thing, because I'm told the time is up. I think the greatest victim in the run-up to the elections was Arvind Kejriwal, and the way he was portrayed by the Indian media, and the perception that people, or at least the middle class, have of him. Allow me to read from a cover story in a magazine I read a few months ago. The sensational rise of Arvind Kejriwal and his Aam Aadmi Party, which has terrified both the Congress and Modi's BJP, eliminates the need for millions of Indians to sacrifice their right to moral judgment for practical considerations. Kejriwal, even though he's attired in an odd cap as if he has lost a bet, and an oversized shirt and trousers, is almost everything that Modi is believed to be. A few months ago, The Economist had said, in contrast with the pampered Mr. Gandhi, Mr. Modi comes from a low caste and a modest background as a tea seller. His success is down to drive innovation. And in a system shot through corruption, he seems pretty clean. But then my point is, this again, but for a few details, is a better description of Kejriwal. From the oblivion of activism, he engineered a mass movement using an old man as a masquerade, broke away after gaining enough attention, stayed in spotlight by feeding dramatic stories to journalists that changed powerful people, stories that journalists could not have reported on their own because their organizations would not have allowed that. It is not odd that Mukesh Ambani sent legal notices not to Kejriwal but to several television channels, taking offense to the coverage of Kejriwal's press conferences. So Mukesh Ambani did not send legal notice to the man who was saying that, that Mr. Ambani had various suicide attempts, but he sent the legal notices to the media, and I thought his counterattack was spot on. It was just absolutely brilliant. So that's where we are right now, and I think May 16th will tell us one important thing, whether in the Indian media is able to capture the electorate accurately or not. So that's what I'm waiting and watching. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph, for a journalist's perspective. And now may I call upon Mr. Ravi Velloor, foreign editor at the Straits Times, for his comments on media perspectives.
Vice for giving me this opportunity to speak here. If you watch the Indian media, there is a sense that we are on the cusp of something quite unprecedented. Last night in my mailbox, I got a press release from the Center for Media Studies, and they released their study findings on television coverage. And it appears that the BJP got 38% of the coverage, compared with 28% for Congress and 19% for the Aam Aadmi Party. Personality-wise, Mr. Modi got fully a third of the coverage. Arvind Kejriwal got 10%, and Rahul Gandhi, whose campaign was no less vigorous than Mr. Modi's, got 5%. The television is gorging itself on Modi because it senses that he is the man that people want to see. It reminds me of 1984 when a young Rajiv Gandhi had taken charge of India. He was called Mr. Clean, he was handsome, large sections of the people wanted to see him, they just could not get enough of him. Meanwhile, many Indian journalists are arranging themselves on each side of the Modi divide. Many have turned pro-Modi and softened towards him. Others are steadfastly cutting out profiles as anti-Modi people. But I'd like to leave the main discussion on media to my colleague from India. And instead, I'd like to make a few broad points and hopefully bring a little more perspective into this phenomenon called Modi and the party that backs him. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's a tendency to see Modi in two distinct colors. If you live overseas, you get the feeling that he's the best thing that could have happened to India in the current circumstances that this country is in. I do know that large sections of Indians also feel the same way. This does seem to be a Modi wave, and that's undeniable across the country. But if you talk to minority groups in India, particularly those minority groups that did not emerge as branches of Hinduism, they see his rise as a calamitous event. And so do many liberal Indians, actually. I think both decisions are a bit overstated. Mr. Modi is a disruptive force, but even if he should win through, I don't think that India has enough checks and balances to curb both his best and his worst instincts. So I would recommend, especially to the fund managers who sit here and pump up the Indian stocks, to be either too exuberant, and those who really think Modi is guy, that I think excessive pessimism is also not over. I think India has the resilience to both accept Modi and to control him. Please don't forget that in '92 we had a phenomenon, Mr. L.K. Advani's rise, which shocked a lot of us. Many of us thought that the India we knew had died, and that an unfamiliar new India was taking place. But as we all know, once Mr. Advani came to power, as the BJP came to power, Mr. Advani desperately sought to moderate his image. Modi too will learn the limits of his power and the need to be a leader to all Indians, if he's not aware of it already. Secondly, I'd say that the rise of the BJP and the Modi did not happen by accident. Both the party and the man are a product of the times. A small part of it is external to India, and let me explain why. If you look at the external dimension and look at the South Asian situation as it emerged in the 70s, you see a creeping majorityism that is taking place around India. In many South Asian countries, the majorities have begun to assert itself. Pakistan was an Islamic republic. Then in the 70s, Ceylon renamed itself Sri Lanka and put the Sinhala lion on its flag, and began to stress Buddhism over the other two major religions of that country. Even tiny Bhutan purged its mainly Hindu-speaking Nepalese population. These were small but important milestones in India's neighborhood. But India was large enough to ignore these developments, except that at home, major political parties were playing the communal card. Even those you consider the most secular groups. Let me start with my own home state, Kerala, and with a party that denies the existence of God, which is the Marxists. Some of you may know that we in Kerala got our Islam right from the birth of Islam. We call our Muslims Maplas, which means Mapile or son-in-law. Although the state has had bouts of communal stress, which has largely been peaceful. But in 1969, Marxist Chief Minister Mr. Nambudiri conceded the demands of the Muslim League for a new district called Malappuram, carved out of many areas that have dense Muslim settlements. Why did the Marxists do it? They did it for their own electoral purposes. But today, 12 of the 16 MLAs or the state legislatures from the district are from the Muslim League. Only 2 are from the left and 2 are from Congress. And the district lags in social indicators, and there's even anecdotal evidence that suggests that Hindus are encouraged to move out of the area and pressured to sell land to Muslims. Although there have been no major communal riots in Kerala, the communal situation is quite high. Wahhabi Islam is spreading. The first Muslim terrorists from Kerala have been caught. But what about Congress? Look at what Mrs. Gandhi did in Punjab when she played with Sikh separatism and communalism there. In 1983, Kashmir was going to the polls. The valley was clearly an international conference. Mrs. Gandhi went to every important Hindu temple in the Jammu region. And sure enough, when the votes came, the divide was very clear between the Muslim Valley and Hindu Jammu. So I'm saying this because I just want to tell you that communal politics has had a long history in India. And her son, Rajiv Gandhi, would probably have the best opportunity, also scored it. He had 411 seats out of 543 in Parliament. No Prime Minister, not even Nehru had that kind of mandate. And yet, when it came to this case called the Shah Manu case, where a divorced Muslim woman was, Supreme Court ordered for the woman to be paid alimony or maintenance, Mr. Gandhi had legislation passed in Parliament that overturned the Supreme Court judgment. In the process, he sacrificed his most promising Muslim minister, a man called Arif Mohammed Khan. So, there have been a lot of instances like these that have outraged the majority community. And this has helped the BJP grow in this space. But once it came to power, the limits of both its political reach and its Hindu ideology have been very evident. One of the reasons for this is that the BJP perspective about both India and Hinduism is a very narrow one. Unlike Congress, it is not even a true national party. It has no great traditions. You only have to read its manifesto to know that this really is a party of the Hindi heartland, the so-called Cow Beltway. Half the phrases in the document are written in Hindi, and even for me, someone who knows Hindi, I find it uncomfortable to read it. What's more, the entire Hindutva philosophy is based on a false understanding of Hinduism and its true nature, and it is an attempt to distort it. you look at the BJP ideology, it promotes one God, which is Ram, in a country which is, it's got multiple deities. If you read the literature of its fraternal organizations such as the VHP, which is the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, you see an attempt to build a church within the Hindu fold and to promote one holy book over others. In fact, they want to guide Hinduism towards a model of Christianity. So this kind of ideology is destined to fail, and this is what happened. Beyond northern India, the BJP's appeal wanes. And this is why, even with an improving economy, the BJP government lost steam in 2004. And India, everyone is talking about India shining, the BJP believed India was shining. And what happened? India bounced it out of power. Not only did they bounce it out of power, in 2009, they returned the UPA government with a slightly higher majority. Even today, the BJP has not recovered, not from the shock of 2009, but from the shock of 2004. So today it's back again on the cusp of power. It has to thank not itself, but the Congress party for what looks like its impending victory. If Congress had not squandered its opportunities and the goodwill that India had for it in 2009, it would not be in the sorry state that it is today. In fact, if you look at communal the record and all that, Congress has not done too badly at all. Communal passions have been down. Although the last year they have come up a bit as India approached elections. And if you look at BJP state governments in Rajasthan, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, they are actually more prone to corruption than many Congress-led governments. But because of the poor performance of the central government and the mounting evidence that the Prime Minister was only a puppet in the hands of one family, people are willing to overlook what they know in the states about the BJP to vote this man to power. Indians want Modi because he has a reputation of being a good administrator. But also, they see a man in him. And I suspect they also sense less humbug in him than the others who are asking for votes on the basis of their concern for the poor or secularism. So, in a sense, this brings me back to my original point that Mr. Modi is really a product of his times. He's certainly not the only good administrator in India. There are very good chief ministers, Mr. Ravi Velloor in Odisha, Nitish Kumar in Bihar, who shown themselves to be good and effective leaders of states. But these leaders are restricted to their regions, and this leaves the field open to Mr. Modi. So let me end with this note. Let me just say that Modi is not the curse he's made out to be. Certainly he's not the only blight in India. And at the same time, neither is he completely the cure. I said before that in 1984, Indians could not get enough of Rajiv Gandhi. But 3 years later, by 1987, they just didn't want to see him. He became so unpopular. So I suspect that Indians will also get over their current fascination with Modi, simply because the nation is too big and complex to be dominated by just one man. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ravi, for sharing your thoughts with us today. I would now like to invite on stage our final speaker, Ms. Shoma Chaudhury, journalist and former managing editor of Tehelka magazine, to share her insights on media perspectives for the 2014 Indian elections.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. I'm not going to waste your time or mine in trying to predict what we'll all know in 6 days' time. And it really doesn't matter whether the media can sort of predict whether Modi is going to win or with what a margin Rahul is going to lose, or indeed whether there's going to be a third front government. the media is notorious for never getting elections right, and that is the wonderment of India, and I'd like to preserve that. What I'd really like to speak about is that, very quickly to concede some of the things that we all already know. We know the failures of the Congress. We know that big business is really desperate for some stable leadership, for decisions that don't change and reverse by the minute, and most of all for a kind of simple regulatory mechanism where whatever be the decision, that they can understand the landscape within which they're going to invest. I'm also not going to talk about the polarizations that Modi engenders, because all of that is something that we already know. What I do want to say is that today particularly, it is very difficult to understand what is really happening in India, because it is true that our fraternity is heavily bought out, and the messaging that the media does is driven by everything except news from the ground. So much of this is about television debate, so much is about the cocoon of desire that you might have within the ivory towers of our studio discussions, and indeed what promoters want, as Manu said. I think Ravi was saying that the media has been projecting Mr. Modi because they intuit that this is the man that people want to see. But my problem is that I don't know whether it is the man that people want to see or that he has been turned into the man that people want to see because of the kind of straff coverage that he has had. And why is it that Nitish Kumar should become the debris of history and Modi should become the rising star? That is absolutely a sleight of hand that has been engineered by the media. And I'd like to remind ourselves that I think the true affliction that India has today is this idea of the magic wand. Everybody is kind of marketing this magic wand. Arvind Kejriwal believed that it was the Lokpal, and I actually fear the Lokpal as it was constructed by Arvind. For a brief moment you thought that he was a man descended from heaven and that he was going to be the answer to everything in India because he seemed to hold all the answers. But the Lokpal is a highly centralized idea, a very dangerous idea for democracy. And I think India already has all the institutions, all the legal mechanisms that we need to eradicate corruption. What we need actually is a heavy dose of ethics in our collective life. We do not need further centralization, we don't need further laws, we don't need anything more, we just need a new kind of collective idea. So I'm not going to really sort of try to predict who's winning or who's losing. I do believe that the BJP is going to be the single largest party, but I don't think that this is an election that is about the BJP, it is certainly about Mr. Modi. What I'm intrigued about is that even as I listened to all of you this afternoon, I feel that the media, and indeed all of you who are great influencers, are victim to a very large missing piece in the conversation. And the media is certainly responsible for that. And that is that even as we speak of the demographic bulge, even as you speak of how India has proudly entered the marketplace, the global market space, indeed even as we stand here trying to prise open the doors for more of this freeway of the marketplace, what we always forget that the marketplace is not just about trade and finance, it is also a marketplace of ideas. And as you open up the poor to the global market space, you're also engendering desire, ambition, and a language of rights. And everything that we have spoken of in terms of the paralysis of this UPA government, we speak of their failures post-2009. Whatever little bit of journalism and on-ground reporting that I have done, or indeed my former colleagues at Tehelka did, actually points to something else. And that's what I'd like to speak about, and it's a continuing missing piece, which is that I believe there is a design defect in the way corporate projects are planned. I believe there's a design defect in the central planning and opening up and inviting of big business and finance. And what happens is that because, when you speak of markets and stock markets, you talk of sentiment, which is a purely irrational human sentiment. People are pissed off with your decisions or they're not. But when you speak of macroeconomy and you're talking of millions and millions and millions of people, you do not take into account sentiment. You do not take into account human ambition, human desire for justice. These are seen as inconveniences, and so they are not part of macro planning. And that is why, regardless of whether it's going to be Mr. Modi or indeed Mr. Chidambaram, who's as right of center in his economic vision, who believes that 85% of India should be brought into urban centers, what all these macro planners and indeed big business forgets to do is to plan for human beings. And what then happens is that you have midstream or downstream resistances that build up. And then you look to China and you look to Singapore and you forget a very fundamental thing, that India is not China, India is not Singapore, and nor indeed is it Dubai, and nor indeed is it America, which is 4 times our landmass and 1/4 our population. So every time you try to transplant these things into India, we forget the fundamentals. We are a deeply mature political democracy, and as we have opened up to the world, as technology has penetrated down to the last mohalla, as indeed we have put cell phones into everybody's hands, today people have information at their fingertips, they have a sense of entitlement, and indeed proudly for us, democracy has gone down to the absolute roots. And so, if you want to indeed trigger growth, and you want it to be sustainable, actually, the planning has to take these in as stakeholders. You have to not look at environment and ecology as an inconvenience. You have to plan for it at the very center. When you invite in big business, make it part of your planning, because inevitably there will be resistance downstream, and that is what creates policy paralysis. Because the point is, you're inviting in people on unequal terms, and then when down the stream people resist it, we are in electoral democracy. Political power realizes that, oh my God, I have to go back to these people for votes, and then what you have is paralysis. People are unable to decide, you have reversal of decisions. And the simple thing that I'd really like to say is that very often we look at this as inconvenience. Mr. Chidambaram and Mr. Manmohan Singh has created the investment, this cabinet committee on investments, where any project that is above 1,000 crore is going to have a single window clearance. It is a short-term idea. Mr. Modi is able to do what he has done because Gujarat is largely made up of barren land. Will he be able to bring that vision of fast-tracking land, fast-tracking clearances into something as complex as India? Unless he does what Mr. Tarun Das is speaking of now, when he's no longer the head of the CII. As long as he was the grand man of the CII, he was speaking this extremely myopic language. If you speak to him now, he will speak about this business about fair takeover of land, of entitlements, of stakeholder politics. Why is it that the men in power and the women in power not speak of this? And I don't say this as a kind of left-leaning liberal heart person, that every time I try to raise these issues, it is seen as a bleeding heart liberal conversation. And what I'm trying to say is, and I want to say at the outset, is that I'm a devotee of capitalism. I certainly don't want a communist or a social state. I don't believe in an equal society. I do believe in an equal access society. But what I think is that at this juncture, history is providing us an opportunity for creating capitalism with conscience, corporate citizens, that indeed today all of Indian media is focused on bad political leadership. I would love us to have the courage to focus on corporate leadership, because in a sense, today the corporates are much more powerful than politicians. They are impacting lives much more. As we're pushing for privatization of every aspect of our lives, our collective lives, indeed it is going to be the vision of corporates that is going to decide our national lives much more than the puny leadership of whatever political party comes to power. And so I'll give you a small example. Singrauli, I've been hearing about energy. I think much more than China and Pakistan, the real national security issues is the quality of water in our country. The fact that 80% of our groundwater is contaminated. Our surface water is unusable even for agricultural use. The fact that 1.2 crore people belong to the dairy sector. The fact that almost 60 or 70% of India belongs to the agricultural sector. The fact that Mr. Chidambaram says that in 20 years of liberalization, we have created, that's the official statistic, 15 million jobs. Let's assume that's wrong and double that. We've created 30 million jobs. But I was just looking at their manifestos. Now they say that in 10 years or in 5 years, we are going to create 10 crore jobs out of manufacturing. And common sense tells me that it is not possible to create so many Jaguar or indeed garment factories that will absorb the 450 million young people that are going to be joining the workforce. So every time we speak about wanting to drive people off the land, it just seems to be a colossal failure of historic imagination. I would love it, and I believe growth will be sustainable when these essential, irreconcilable irrationalities are taken out of planning and are in fact factored into planning. I believe we have 40 million people in the craft sector. That's pretty much almost the size of Spain, We have 80 million tribals. I never hear these discussions in our macro planning. I never hear these discussions in indeed those who have the rationality and the brain to discuss this. When we speak about natural resources, in the last 20 years, the reason why the economic model in our country is kind of coming to a grand standstill is because so much of it has been about resource plunder. And we speak about climate change, but the fact is that because we're a mature political democracy, people do not want to feel the collateral damage of history on their skin, and they will not allow it to be felt. So indeed in Singrauli or in Sonbhadra, I have been there. I have seen a sea of arsenic sludge that people are walking through. Their children are deformed. Now Singrauli and Sonbhadra, as you will know, is the hub, is perhaps the largest energy hub in Asia. Every blue chip company has a project there. But the villages around Sonbhadra and Singrauli do not have access to electricity. We talk about this panic of energy generation in India. The truth is, we have almost 40% of transmission deficiency. We have almost a 60% inefficiency in power generation. But all we are hungry to do is to open up new power projects. We've created 600 dams on the Ganga. We're close to killing the Ganga. Now, I'm not crying over that because I am a devotee of Goddess Ganga. It's not because I do love the mountains and the greenery, and all of us who get rich want our green getaways. But it's not for that I am afraid of this situation. I'm afraid of this as an economic catastrophe. I'm afraid of the fact that the Western Ghats will be slashed and burned and used up. Not because I'm a left liberal, but because I think this is an economic disaster. And why is it that we are not planning for it now? When the people of Kudankulam resist the Kudankulam nuclear plant, it is not because they don't want it or that they don't want a better life. It is because they are asking a very genuine question, which is, what are you going to do with the nuclear waste? Will it heat the ocean's waters? Will it spoil our fisheries? These are legitimate questions. Will your stakeholders not ask those questions? When Tata's wants to take over Jaguar, does it get off the table, making everybody feel that it's a good deal? Or do you make somebody feel that they've been robbed in broad daylight and still ram a deal through? So my simple point today is that if it is going to be good politics, it is immaterial who comes in. I think for good politics, one will have to start to factor in this as an inevitable. And if indeed urbanization and capitalism are historical inevitabilities, I think it is also time to recognize that people's rights and the ecological equation is an economic question. It is a historic inevitability, and the two things go hand in hand. Empowerment is a part of the global marketplace, and you cannot wish that away. You can't try to bring the Chinese model of government and the Chinese rate of growth into India, because we are not politically what China is. And if we fail to understand that basic thing, no matter how muscular a leader comes to power in Delhi, we are going to be faced with the same paralysis 3 years down the line. Thank you so much.